welcome you all for my thesis. Good morning to you. The topic of my thesis is architecture validation and characterization of AFP controller for WinCDOR platform. We will first look into the research objectives. So we had the previous architectural revision 1. We have this revision 2. So what we want to do in this revision is really want to validate the architecture for virtual flow pipelining controller, how it is working, characterize some of the things of it. We wanted to decide on some validation metrics, like how can we validate this complex system. Then how can we decide on validation methodology, because choosing the right kind of environment is also quite important to get your results. Then the next part was building the necessary environment for the architecture validation and functional verification. The last part was analyze the results and suggest the improvements. So now we will go for the outline actually. So I will briefly explain about current implementation of WinCDOR, what we have there. Then why do we have to go for a OVM-based verification environment? Then a bit introduction about OVM-based environment, how does it look, what components it has and all. Then how we have used OVM for our system, configure it, tweak it, necessary changes and all. Then we go into the core research, which is the characterization of AFP overhead. So here we want to find out how much extra penalty we are paying for the added flexibility or dynamicity we have included in the architecture. Then we also look into the processing engines and bus utilization in order to check certain things I will explain at the right point. And then we found out certain system-related parameters which are necessary for the system programmer. So we will just go through the system first. So this is a SOC-based system, first of all. We are targeting for an ASIC platform later words. So this is a single cluster, and we have so many clusters in the system. All the clusters are connected to a main system interconnect, which is AMBA AXI bus. Inside the cluster, you have again one more bus. So this is a hierarchy of buses. We have done this in order to segregate the communication across the clusters and within the cluster, so that the bus is free. Inside the cluster, all the modules, the FU is functional unit. That's why we're calling it as a FU. These are the main engines which will be doing some processing. So we have these all units connected to AXI bus. We have this UFP controller over here, which is kind of controlling all the modules connected to the bus. We have our own local bus as well in order to share or send control messages between the VFP controller and between the FUs. Inside the FU, we have this kind of structure. So inside every FU, we have a processing engine, which is the main core processing engine. Let's say MAC or interleaver or modulator or header with respect to communication aspect. Then every processing engine needs some sort of memory to store the input variables and store output variables and all. So these come inside the local data memory. Then you have one DMA engine, which is necessary to transfer the data between different modules. Let's say from this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, so on and so forth. Next, we have some interface to connect to AXI bus. So that's pretty generic actually.
So let me ask you a question. I saw the document last night at 9 o'clock. I didn't go into the details. Is this functional unit is programmable?
In terms of what,
like it's hardware programmable or software? Is
there's a mix and match. There are two things. One thing is functionality. You can program it via software. Like you can define the functions that this module is supposed to do this much amount of work. And in terms of hardware, you have flexibility in terms of flow. I will explain virtual flow later as well in the coming slides. So it is programmable and it is reconfigurable at runtime. So per packet, you can change the protocol. Per packet, you can have different modules sending data to different modules.
Is that a hardware or is that a processor based?
Yes, this is a processor based.
What processor are you using?
These are the local HDL designs recorded.
So your own processor?
Yeah, your own processors. So let's say if you have a module which can support more than 2 or 3 functionalities, then it can do more than 2 tasks or 3 tasks, like different tasks. But at a time, this guy is doing just like say adding CRC and all. Next guy is just scrambling the data. So right now they are just doing one task at a time. But I think later Mohit's work will show that the same interlevers will work for different standards. So the processing engines needs to have this functionality built into it. We can provide the necessary means to select the functionality of the processing engines.
Yeah, what is not clear to me is like a PGA kind of reconfiguration, or you have some hardware and you are just basically reconfiguring it based on whatever is there, fixed hardware.
hardware is fixed, let's say.
Fixed hardware.
Yeah, the hardware is fixed. You just choose certain functionality. Uh, right. So the VFP controller is managing the messaging between the different FUs and all. So I will just briefly explain. This is based on virtual flow pipelining, and we also have some multiple flows. I will explain in short what do we mean by virtual flow. So in a traditional system, you always have data transfers from block 1 to block 2, and it's a hardware system. It's like 5-stage pipelining or n-stage pipelining. Always stage 1 is giving output to the stage 2 and so on and so forth. So in this, you don't have flexibility. You can't choose the models. Like let's say block 1 cannot send its output to block 3 directly. You will have to have dedicated paths for that, like data forwarding and other things. Virtual flow means the flow like this, like block 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, is not there at all. So the choice, like whom should we send the data from block 1 to block n, is taken at runtime. So these parameters are known to the particular FU and mainly to the VFP controller. So every block sends the particular information to the VFP controller and says send this data to the appropriate consumer. So this is how the flow is virtual. You don't have fixed connections. So you can skip a block, let's say, in order to support multiple protocols. Let's say one protocol doesn't require a particular module, so you can just skip that. You can just directly transfer its output from this guy to the next guy or something like that.
So dynamic.
Yeah, this is the
runtime.
yeah.
Runtime.
So this part is runtime configurable. Like whom should we send the data?
Yeah.
And next is a bit complicated, but it's not that difficult to understand. So system supports multiple flows. Now we need to define what do you mean by multiple flows and what do you mean by single flows and what do we achieve out of it. So in the last slide, single flow can be like, let's say, just one set of transactions from block 1 to 3 to 4 and so on and so forth. There is no multiplexing of units. There is no overlap here. But in case of multiple flow, like here you can see from T1 to T2, there is a gap. So this is a particular processing engine is performing, let's say, task 1. It has to wait for some of the time so that its outputs are returned. The VFP controller identifies that this P is free and it can load the new data into this input buffer. If you make it earlier, you will overwrite its input buffer. It may not have finished its processing. So this waiting period is there in normal single flow case. But in multiple flow case, you overlap this period, T1 and T2, because you have different set of buffers for different tasks. So even though the task 1 is going on, you can load the buffer for the task 2. So this is how you will achieve the kind of overlap or gain here. But then next part is if the processing engine takes a lot of time to process the data, then you lose kind of the gain which you have got by the overlap. So the next part here is some sort of chunking. So what do I mean by chunking is slicing of the data. So let's say I give you a frame of 400 bytes or 1.5k bytes of frame size. If every processing engine starts processing 1.5k bytes of data, everything is going to get slowed down. So you slice up the data into smaller chunks, let's say 100 bytes, 200 bytes, and every processing engine is working on the small chunk. That's why you can achieve this overlap, plus you can work on smaller data size. So this T1 to T2 can be a bit less compared to the single flow. So this is how we try to achieve multiple flows.
But there is an overhead of if you slice it up in smaller packets and transmitting every time, right? So there could be some trade-off between these two, right? Like what would be?
You basically wait till you get the entire frame. At the last block, you don't send the frame intermittently. You send only once you have all the data or all the chunks necessary.
But your processing is a part of the packet.
Yes, it is processing part of the packet.
So what would happen if you keep it decreasing the size of the packets that you're processing?
At one point, what will happen is the overhead of
Right, exactly. So
it
there
will
is a
increase,
point. There
and
is a point where the advantage would be how far outweighed by the overheads, right? So
Yes.
there's got to be a point where you want to do it at an optimal place.
I don't know the exact numbers in
Okay,
terms
so
of
I'm just
processing, but
pointing
yes,
out.
there
This
is
is
a
the
trade-off.
analysis you have to look into.
Yeah, there is a trade-off. So this is about like some virtual flow and something about chunking and how do we achieve multiple flows. Now, considering this background of the system is quite complicated. You have one dedicated controller for all processing engines. You have a lot of different messaging going on and on. And it's quite necessary to have very powerful verification or validation environment in order to check the correctness of the design, in order to find the bugs. Otherwise, it's difficult and it won't be even manageable to debug all the waveforms, because then there are way too many signals to manage and handle. So you need to have some sort of mechanism so that some automated way, let's say, Like let's say you open a file and see, okay, this is the error. Let's go to that point and check what's going on there, right? Or area on that point. So first we have to define how do we choose that kind of environment, and what are the other possible options we had with us. So this slide shows what does the basic test bench means. So basic test bench has to do any test bench. Let it be any verification methodology or anything. Everyone has to generate some sort of stimulus or input, apply it, capture the response, check the correctness, and see how many input combinations you have applied in order to check the coverage and all. That is a bit later part. So this is the basic thing. Now, in terms of test benches, you have two types of test benches. One is a flat test bench, and second is a layered test bench. So this flat test bench means like I think you would remember in DSD course we would write our own dedicated test benches. We would hook it up to the module. So that was the flat test bench. Your scope is limited. So that kind of test bench has the advantage of easy to write. Like you are working on small transactions, small things at a time. It's also quick just to see, okay, my everything is working, something is going on. That's it. But that doesn't help you in order to cater all your verification needs. So what it lacks is it's not reusable. It will be reusable only if you group certain activities into tasks and functions. And we'll have to make calls to tasks and functions. Like we'll have to make a flow. Like okay, task 1, task 2, task 3, task 4. Then it kind of will become reusable. Otherwise, it's wastage of effort. Then it's all manual effort. You have to write the test cases manually. Once manual effort comes to the picture, it's almost an error prone, plus it's time consuming. So that's why it's also like slow converging process overall. Plus you may not get that flexibility in terms of generating constant random stimulus. Always in the industry it has been proved that constant random stimulus generation can help you in finding the bugs at a faster rate than normal static way. So that is also absent from this. And you also don't have any automation to check your the results, the correctness of the results. Sorry. So what option do we have other than that? So this is the other option we have, layered test bench. Any methodology you pick in the market has to follow what layered test bench is trying to offer. Because that's what all the methodologies are trying to do. They're trying to help you to get this kind of a test bench. So there are different levels in the test bench. DUT is here, all the other blocks are here. So what do I mean by different layers? So the driver, monitor are essentially responsible for following the protocols. They are just following the protocol. They are not doing anything else. So this guy will get its transaction from agent. And this entire thing is in software. This is not HDL code. This can be like any C code or whatever code, it can be anything. You need to have some sort of interface to drive from higher level languages to HDL. That's a different case. So agent will tell what type of transactions it has to pump in. This agent will also tell the scoreboard that this right now he has inserted this particular scenario. So the scoreboard then can predict the output, what to expect. Then based on the DUT's output, monitor will send this data to the checker. Now checker has both data, expected data and the data which it has got. Based on that it will check. So this is all automated, all the operations are segregated. On every layer is a one sort of abstraction. So you have smaller set of operations going on here. So here you will have, let's say, just basic read and write operation. But here you will have DMA transfer. Here you will have 2 DMA transfers and 2 register reads. So on and so forth, you build the scenario. So the test writer just says, okay, I just want to test whether this amplifier can download music and play some of the files. That will boil down to some of the DMA transfer, checking the results, checking the internet connection, storing the data and all. And this will be managed by this generator and send it down levels.
Which level you have the different test scenario data?
This guy will be different for every test case. So as this guy changes, see the lower part of the architecture almost remains the same. It doesn't change.
Right.
That's the beauty of any layer. You just have to change
Those
this
and
guy.
reads it from different environment.
So that's how you reuse the environment as well. That saves the effort.
How do you propose to generate that?
Reuse of the environment?
Yeah.
Yes. So I will explain you with our system as well once we come to that part actually. So these are the overall advantages, like reusable, it's just one-time effort. It takes a longer time to build it. But since you have so many different blocks, you can divide the work in various teams and all, and you can get the work done faster. And it's fast converging, it allows you to generate constant random stimulus. There is no limit on the number of test cases you want to execute in compared to the direct on the flat test case. So this is the right layer test bench architecture for any current or modern ASIC devices. So then now we should look into it, what were the other possible options we had for the verification methodology in the market. So when we started, we had four possible options. One was from Mentor Graphics called AVM. Second was URM by Cadence. Third was VMM, and fourth was OVM, which is a joint venture between Cadence and Mentor. So in the due course, Cadence and Mentor have stopped giving support for AVM and URM because they have merged everything to the OVM. So even if you search AVM and URM, you will see OVM link. So we have only two options left, VMM and OVM. And in terms of that, when we started like a year back ago, VMM was not free. We had to pay some price to Synopsys. It was also their tool dependent. So that was the kind of a bad choice. Plus, OVM was much more powerful than VMM. As you can see, many features were borrowed from OVM. There is a whole set of presentation done by one of the Mentor guys.
What is VMM?
Verification methodology manual. So then there are a lot of other things like transaction level modeling is not there. There are some sort of set and config methods where you can set parameters of the lower levels from the top levels. So test writer, once it specifies certain test cases, all the configurations will travel down to the lowest level. This is how you will achieve the pre-configured. So and VMM was also not that flexible. So what we had in terms of OVM is it was free, plus it was running on all the simulators. It was powerful, unlike VMM. VMM was running only on the Synopsys VCS tool. Plus it is interoperable, as in you can take the code written which is working on Mentor Graphics and put it on NCZ, or you can put it on VCS, it will run fine. Any simulator which is supporting system with the 1800 standard will be the necessary criteria for it. Plus, it's kind of a proven methodology because they have the joint venture for a year and a half. They thought about it. They must have put their best practices together. And the next part is all CAD tool vendors are now kind of supporting this because there are certain features of OVM which were not supported by certain CAD tool vendors, especially Synopsys. So they are also now providing support for OVM. And the next part is in a few months or something, Accelera is doing some standardization in terms of verification methodology. Now you will have just one universal verification methodology whose basis is OVM. So all other methodologies are kind of obsolete right now. Just the OVM is the one basic thing left in the market right now. Sorry.
But is that cost people to use this?
No, it's free.
It also, right? So it's like open source.
Yeah, it's open source. That's why O is so open.
Yeah. So no wonder that would be very popular.
But it was also flexible, unlike. So what we have is overall OVM verification based environment. This figure is almost or analogous to the layered test bench figure. So any methodology is trying to get this layered test bench thing. So let me explain what each block is doing. So we have this driver. The main concept of driver is again the same, to drive the transactions. Driver has to follow protocol. Monitor has to sniff and to check about the protocols. The agent is just an encapsulation layer, which will give you flexibility in terms of setting certain parameters. You can turn off the monitor. Let's say at certain point you don't want the coverage to be taken. You can just turn it off. You don't want certain checks to be done, you can turn it off. Or you can set certain values. You can enable the coverage checks at runtime. So a lot of configuration and options are there by every encapsulation layer. So sequencer is the guy who is generating the sequences. So he's the main guy who is driving the scenarios and getting the necessary constraint and stimulus to the execute. The next encapsulation is of environment. Again, you have different layers of encapsulations where you can tweak or set certain parameters. So this is the flexibility you have been provided. You may not need it, but they are given. And eventually you have a scoreboard. So in terms of OVM terminology, scoreboard is doing all the checking. So all the monitor will send data through the analysis code. This is all transaction level modeling based channels. It will send the data to the OVM scoreboard, and scoreboard is supposed to check it, where it is right and wrong, and report it as per that. So scoreboard will keep track of functionality. How many functions did you cover and what were the reports on that. Whereas monitor will gather the coverage information. And this is finally the OVM test level where you decide what should be your total scenarios or what should be your total sequences right now. So you can decide, I want to go for 3 transactions, or I want to go for n transactions, I want to go for some hierarchical sequences and all. So that sort of can take place here. So the test writer is supposed to manage or handle data at this level. And all the layers down, he has to set certain configurations, and that's it. This is how the environment or methodology becomes reusable by not changing the code, and you can use it for different purposes by just tweaking the parameters at runtime. Actually, this will drink water. So once we say you have the OVM, then what do we get actually? You get this is a class hierarchy. You get their classes, you get their methods, you get their macros, you get their hookups to create this environment. The next part is you get their phases. Now these phases are important or essential because they kind of control how the simulator is going to work. So every time, whenever the traditional test benches or any simulator will start executing all the tasks or like always begin blocks, all the event blocks right at this stage. There is no way you can have some pre-processing before run. Whereas OVM is giving you these phases so that you can do some sort of pre-processing. So this build phase is actually responsible for making this hierarchy possible. Like every parent is going to call its child. In terms of objects, classes and objects is going to create object and dedicate a memory for that. And connect is every class has some sort of interface so that it can share data between the different verification components. Let's say from driver to monitor or from monitor to scoreboard. So you need to literally connect or bridge the gap. The interfaces are just dangling. So the connect phase will make sure that they are connected together. Then end of elaboration is again some sort of last minute tweak if you want to make. You don't have to have all these phases in your code, but they have given you the facility. Then the next phase is start of simulation. So this is quite useful for us because here you can set certain like displaying the banners, making ready your files, log files, that this file is doing this sort of stuff and all.
Do you have to somehow integrate the simulator tool with this?
No, you just have to execute your normal system middle of code.
But then how does it collect
So-
statistics and it got to be somewhere?
Statistics? No, that you have to write. They just give you the phase that, okay, if you want to collect some statistics related information, do it in here. So let's say after the start of simulation, you will run certain things. You will get certain results out. So extract is the phase where you will see, okay, what results I got. So let's say if you have 4 monitors, all the 4 monitors will report, this was my coverage. Let's say, or you read some status registers that this many times the violation occurred or this many times there was an error. So you read all this in this phase. Then you check whatever results you got, whether it is valid or wrong, or you have to do some processing. And finally, report is just either dump it to a files or just write it to a database so that it can be available for later analysis. So you don't get these phases irrespective of like if OVM is giving you these phases. Otherwise, you kind of skip these phases.
Well, I understand, but what I was trying to find out, is this a compiled code?
Yes.
It's a
You
compiled code, right?
you get the source code. You have to include the source code by compile. And the source code
Now, how
about
about the simulator? The compiled code goes into this one. Finally, you get one final code which has this as the simulator code.
No, it's not like that. So every time, like let's say I'm compiling a system level code, I have to compile all OVM source code along with my design.
Yeah, how does it invoke the simulator then? Simulator code is different, right?
Yeah, simulator code is different. So in the simulator, like let's say we have some build script or something, where you specify, okay, I have these many 10 files to compile as a design, and then 11th file you say, please include my environment as well.
Okay.
And it should like you have tick inputs that you have all the libraries you have. So this OVM is essentially a class library.
But the only runtime environment is actually the VCS simulator.
Yeah, so VCS simulator will make sure that it has finding all the necessary libraries based on your tick input you have written.
Yeah.
If you miss that, then
These are all the components of the simulation snapshot, both the DOT and the OVM.
so the OVM will tie it up, and OVM will make sure the simulator is working the way OVM wants, not the simulator wants. So this
I understand, but so suppose I wrote my own simulator, right? And what does it need to be get integrated to this environment?
If your simulator works for a system level or management standard, it will work.
Okay, so it just interfaces to the system very well.
See, all the code written for OVM is written in system level. So ultimately, you will see only system level of code which should be compiled. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So finally, we see how we can use this verification environment to cater our needs. What changes do we have to do to it? And what do we really achieve or what did we really measure using this OVM? So first, we did some validation of the VFP controller. Then we extracted the utilization. We wanted to see how many of our resources are utilized. We also extracted the information about the bus, whether our bus was way too much contented or it was empty and all. And we also computed certain system related parameters. This is a guard time. I will explain what we mean by synchronous transmission. But it is essential to compute system related parameters as well. So what does this slide tell you? Using just only one environment, we can do different material of things. Just one environment, every time you use it, just change certain parameters and it will work this way. Now, in order to validate, what do we have to do? So again, as the traditional test bench is offering, or the layered test bench is offering, you need to generate constant random stimulus for WinCD. So we have some different setup to validate the system, and we have some different setup to run our other simulations, because these are two different things. So in that, we really define what should be my input range. There are certain descriptors and table formats which are necessary for the system to work in order to check whom should we transfer the data to, some dependency is there. So you need to generate those kind of tables and apply the constraints dynamically at runtime. The next part is we have used hierarchical sequences. Hierarchical sequences means parent sequence calling other child sequences. So this kind of also generates very realistic scenario, because our system supports two types of tasks. One is asynchronous task, another is synchronous task. Now asynchronous tasks are executed as per the demand, like okay, I am done, give me the data, I am done, give me the data. Whereas synchronous tasks will be executed on a periodic interval basis. Always, mostly all communication devices have some sort of synchronization required, or synchronous tasks are required. So that's why we have some sort of synchronous task. Now by injecting either synchronous or asynchronous tasks, you kind of generating very realistic scenario, because system can have both of these, or they can have just synchronous tasks. It depends on the scenario. So this is how we make sure that we are generating enough traffic from our end in order to validate the architecture. In terms of checker, we make sure that the architecture is behaving as per the expectation. Like we have scheduler inside this architecture. So we need to make sure that scheduler is scheduling the task at a particular time interval in case of synchronous task. If it fails to schedule a task at that particular time frame, then you need to raise a flag, say scheduler failed to start. This is all things are required, because otherwise the system is imploding. You don't know what's going on there, something is getting missed. There is a bit of a priority in terms of asynchronous tasks. The scheduler needs to follow some sort of priority between asynchronous tasks, priority between synchronous and asynchronous tasks. So the checker will make sure that scheduler is behaving and it is resolving the priorities correctly. And it is giving the commands to the processing engines at a proper time. This is how the automatic checker is. It will log all the files. Okay, this was fast, failed this, and at what time stamp, what was the task heading, so that we can identify it for the debug later. So we have this reporting mechanisms as well, as I showed you in the phases. The reporting mechanism is based on those phases. And we have certain hookups added, again built into the same verification environment, so that we can extract certain performance out of it. Because we really wanted to know what is going on inside the system. Where is the bottleneck? Who is, killing our system? This is a bit complicated here.
Partly because you haven't defined these acronyms.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
They're defined in the next slide, maybe.
Maybe.
You should do it as early as possible, defining your acronym.
I think I will define it while explaining it. Sorry for that. So we wanted to characterize the overhead, because as I showed you earlier, in the case of virtual flow pipelining, the VFP is responsible for transferring data from one vendor to the and how much overhead we impose on the system. So these are the different blocks present in the VFP controller. These are the different internal detailed blocks inside the producer FP. So the SCH is a scheduler. The CT is a command termination block. CID is a consumer identification block. DTI is data transfer initiation block. And TI is task insert. I will explain again when I'm going through the flow. It's hard to remember.
And then you want to put on the side of the slide.
Actually,
Yeah. So
You
that-
have a lot of comments for a few.
By the time
by the time you go to the last one, I forgot the first one.
that's exactly what I was about to say.
No, actually, I forgot.
He's reusing the acronyms in the later slides, so.
By the end of the presentation, you'll get
No,
all the first one.
let me make a break here. Write it on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
because
Just make sure you don't delay the.
I've listened to, I myself get confused. I can imagine the committee, right? Or I can imagine the people that are not in the committee. So I think you have 4 people who can help you out, but I think you should.
Yeah, they get to us anyway.
Should acknowledge in your thesis, this big.
Yes, I have.
You did?
Make sure you spell their names. Your name needs to be spelled right. Okay.
We're gonna have to do the acronym.
Yeah.
So for the rest of the presentation, we're looking, I'm trying to remember this.
Yeah.
If you think essentially about this as a smart DMA engine, if you think about this as a smart DMA engine, between assigning the tasks.
You will say, implementation.
Because previous version of FPGA, we can target this one, but it's, we can target this one to FPGA as well, especially now XFS is available on FPGA.
Yeah, now, you can encore, right? Yeah, sorry.
Encore also for FPGA?
Yeah.
Another question. For what you showed in the architecture, all the processor they're going through this bus.
Yes.
It's not going to be a bottleneck for the whole system?
No, that's what we will show actually later. We also wanted to find out whether that is creating bottleneck or not. There are 2 different buses actually, one for control messages and one for data. So we will show that how it is creating bottleneck or it's not creating a bottleneck.
Part of his work is to study what is the value and what is not of the architecture. That's a valid point.
So, sorry, again we should start. So the important part of VFP override is you need to understand the interaction between producer and consumer. So these guys are producer, these guys are consumer. On upper layer or abstraction layer, the producer has finished its processing data. Now that needs to be transferred from this producer to this particular consumer. Now how do we achieve this and what is the overhead involved with this overall interaction? That's the whole goal of it. Because if you spend much of your time in just doing this, you are wasting a lot of time. So the sequence starts in the scheduler. Scheduler will say, producer, you should start executing a particular task. Start processing the data. This is the step 1. Now inside this, there are some local blocks called as a TA, task activation block. This task activation block will get this command from the scheduler. Now it is the task activation block to get certain parameters from the memory and send this necessary data to the P. So what is the necessary data is the input sizes, the input data size pointers, that from where or which location you should start reading the data, and what is the size of the total data. And it will also specify how many buffers, output buffers are associated for this kind of task right now. So that PE, the processing engine, can write into the proper output buffer regions. So this necessary information is sent from this task activation block to the processing engine. So you can see there is some overhead over here. There is an overhead involved actually with terms of task activation as well, but that will come later when we complete the cycle. So once processing engine has finished its processing data, so this was one, activate the task, grab necessary data, send it to PE, give valid command to the PE. Then PE will put the data into the output buffer, like number 4. It will put the data into the output buffer and then it will send a message to the VFP controller saying, hey, I'm done with my task. please transfer this data to the next appropriate guy. So there are actually two processes, two things going on. One is command termination and one is consumer identification. The command termination part tells VFP controller that this PE is now free to take a new task. This is a separate information. The other block is letting the VFP controller, or VFP controller should now deduce that whom should we transfer the data to. So who is the next consumer? So we have certain memory structure inside the VFP controller by which it can identify who is the next consumer. So let's say it's like a memory, you just access the memory and send the data to the next one, which is again programmable at runtime. So if you change the memory location, the output can be given from this producer to maybe next other consumer. This is how you achieve virtual flow and programming.
So you have different tasks can take different time of processing, right?
So balancing thing is
Huh?
balancing
Yeah,
the pipeline is an
exactly. And then you don't want to see some PE idle there, whereas others
Yeah,
are.
that's what even we measured and found out that what's going on and who is creating the bottleneck. The analysis is essential to find out who is creating the bottleneck, in what sense, what are the areas, and how can we counter effect that later.
You can do it dynamically.
No, first you need to have the analysis, then you can maybe suggest some architectural changes or processing engine may have to change or something. So after consumer identification, the VFP controller will put a request in this data transfer initiation block, so that this will put a request to the appropriate consumer saying you need to start reading data from this guy. And this block will also tell what is the data size it has to read, from where it has to read, the address of this block and the starting address of the location from where it has to read. Then once this, let's say this block is free, this block can initiate a DMA transfer over the bus. Now all the other messages like 1, 5A, 5B, 3, 4, 2 were all happening on the local bus. That was not on the AXI bus.
Which one is the local bus here?
1, 5A, 5B, 7, 9. These are inside function memory. So now data transfer has to occur from this guy to this guy. So let's say one read transaction has happened. This particular consumer has got the data which is stored into its input buffers. Now this guy can really start processing the data, but before doing so, it has to tell VFP controller it has finished transferring the data. Please give me activation command. Once, so this is step number 8 of transferring data from producer to consumer. Then this consumer will notify VFP controller that he's done with transferring. Please give me my task. So this is where the task insertion block comes with the picture, and there is an override for that. Once task insertion is there, then scheduler will again schedule the task, but this time for this consumer. This is how you complete the cycle. So
There's something I'm missing here. It's like, if you look at just but this architecture, you don't need the DXC bus. It could be a dedicated line. So what else is connected to the DXC bus?
different clusters could have been connected to a service.
There are more producers and consumers connected.
Or you could,
Yeah, like-
you don't have it here.
Yeah, he doesn't have, he's just shown one single.
Oh,
one
okay.
person.
Okay.
One producer
So
consumer
that-
interaction.
so go back to the first slide.
Yes, that's what I was looking at.
You have to.
Okay. You have many other.
Yes.
He's really focusing on the VFP controller evaluation.
Okay.
Control scheme.
Even this picture is too busy for my case.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I understand. I mean,
Like that, there can be any function units connected. to
yeah,
the example.
multiple functions, then you need a bus structure.
So overall, this is the interactions going on, and you have overhead almost at every stage except almost every stage except the processing part. So we wanted to find out how much overhead exactly do we have, and whether that overhead changes as per certain requirements or throughput requirements of system or it's static, and we don't know. That's what we want to check. So now, after describing this diagram,
How
we
you
need to
define it?
yeah, kind of defining the delays in terms of like T some variable and TCID and TDT. So these are the different 7 overhead factors we are considering for the VFP controller.
These are not the things he has on the blackboard.
No.
So that's key to
Some of the things are there actually. This is PACT and except I think this part, most of the stuff is there. Because this part is again, first bullet is for this overhead. When the task activation block is reading some information and sending it to the pins, that overhead also needs to be encoded. Because there can be many more guys reading the input buffer, even the P can read the input buffer at the time. So how much delay does that bring on? You really want to know the details of it. So in order to check the performance of the overhead, how it changes, we have two set of experiments. One is a single flow where we are supporting 6, 12 and 24 Mbps, and we are sending 400 bytes of frame back to back.
No, let me ask you this, the PHP unit, this is in hardware?
Yes, this is
Completely hardware, right? The state machine basically.
so, yeah, we use. It is been segregated into different blocks, but on top level you can say this is
The state machine.
The DFP controller.
He's asking. So
No, no,
it's currently.
he's not asking. He doesn't say it.
The
Yeah,
DFP
you-
controller is RTL, and we have a bunch of hardware engines, which are also RTL, and then we have some engines which have behavioral C, because we simply don't have that for the.
Okay. I don't mean to downplay this. At some point, people will ask you, like when we take decisions at our work, what needs to go to hardware and what can be accommodated in software is a very big question. Okay?
That's
And that needs to be justified somehow.
Yes.
I'm not saying you were wrong
Yes,
here.
yes, I understand.
Somehow you need to address that,
Yes,
right?
so this is how this analysis will help us, that if we do it in hardware, how much extra penalty we are doing. And we have some other software implementations done in some other universities. This is for cognitive radio platform, right? Or maybe we can do it here as well later. So you will come to know that most of the time, ideally software defined or cognitive radio is or do all your processing in analog to digital part or digital to analog part and just send the data out. And the other part is completely everything in hardware. You have n modules, there may be just dormant. Then you just choose particular module. This is another flavor.
It seems to me all these different functional blocks that you have, like Mac, MOS, and INFP, this needs to be in hardware for sure, because they have a
Yes.
certain throughput requirement.
Yes.
Whereas PHP is not clear to me why it has to be. Maybe you can.
Because it
think
is
about it.
controlling the events.
I understand, but
Which
you
is-
have some latency requirement that has to be there, that which would require it to be in the hardware. You could easily do it in the software as well.
Otherwise, because that is the time gap between two producer to consumer, right? And that is going to add to your end-to-end latency.
Exactly.
And there are very strict
I
limitations.
agree. And that's the analysis what.
The idea was to move the software out of the data plane.
Because the software will take more time to execute, right? Any software you have.
I agree, you need
So-
to.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I understand.
I'm not saying you're wrong, all I'm saying that is.
But we need to do some sort of
that is a-
comparative study.
When we do an architecture review of this, the first question, if I'm presenting it, I want, why that needs to be in our, tell me. So this is a question I'm
Yes.
telling you.
It's important.
So there are actually two things. The discussion of hardware versus software when it comes to the functional processing,
Mhm.
and then we have the discussion of hardware versus software when it comes to the control part, this VFP. So Mohit's thesis is the first part. He's an interviewer, MIMO, based with the hardware accelerator.
That has to be for sure.
Yeah. So we get special instructions for that,
Yeah.
and he has the considerations hardware with the software. And we would like to have actually a separate thesis that will discuss the performance and complexity trade-offs doing VFP in software or hardware.
Okay.
But that's another 6
Yeah,
months.
that's another-
Yeah, that's.
When you say software, there's a little bit of ambiguity, because like Mohit is working on a specialized DSP, which you can think of it as software.
Yeah, that is software.
Right, but it can do it in time.
Yeah,
It is a trade-off between hardware and software actually.
Well,
It's got
it's-
some special
It's your
instructions.
real-time requirement, like what is the latency minimum you have to have and.
Actually, that will also depend on the protocol you want to cater, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to
It has
cater to
to-
that, your delays has to be in that proportion. So I think ultimately it will put a constraint that what should be the delay.
Like I can put a competing architecture here, and this is not a criticism, all I'm trying to
No.
make is, instead of this, I'll have the functional blocks, and I'll have a processor here, and which works back and forth in the interrupt fashion, right? And if the processor has enough MIPS, which is a lot cheaper than this, I could have much more flexible scenario of this. That's a competing architecture to this, right? So anyway, I mean, I'm bringing up some issues which we might face, in the trade-off.
Yeah.
So this is essentially, your argument is SDR approach versus this hardware-based controller approach, right? So
Right.
But we will have to evaluate that time.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that's fine. That could be another thesis we could establish. look at it that way.
So the experiments were where we are running one flow with 6, 12 and 24 Mbps data rates. We are sending 400 bytes straight. And the next we are running 2 simultaneous flows. So we have this table depicting the overhead values for every split factor involved in the total VFK overhead. So we are computing this, let's say this guy CID DTI per FU. The monitoring logging of events is happening in real time. And these are the average delays overall span of time, let's say over simulation time. So like in all the, if you just consider this column, the value of 15 is almost the constant. So this delay is pretty much static, it's not changing. That's the almost case with all of the overhead we have, except task activation time and data transfer time. And that varies only in case of multiple flow. So if you check TDTI here, you can see a sharp shoot up in the values.
So can you explain it?
Yes.
The picture?
I can explain it.
Data transfer initiation.
Yeah, data transmission and task activation. Like you also see a huge spikes there.
Okay.
So we wanted to characterize that, we wanted to see all the values to be constant across both the cases, but that's not happening. So we wanted to know exactly what went wrong. So the next logical step will be in overall system. You have the bus, you have processing engines, and you have the scheduler. So we need to find out who is wasted, whose resources are wasted a lot, who is maximum times busy, and that will overall point out who is creating the bottleneck. So the next slides will try to explore into that domain, that who is responsible for these increased values of data transfer initiation and task activation periods. So again, we also had some utilization figures. Again, we have compared it with single flow case and with two flows case. So in single flow case, these are the results for 24 Mbps. Particular PE, let's say, are utilized for single flow is relatively less. The utilization is the total time the PE was actually doing some processing compared to the total system time or total simulation time. So that will tell me that how much amount of time this PE was literally busy. It was doing some useful amount of work.
I didn't get that. What is the utilization one more time?
So the numerator is, it's a ratio of 2 time figures. The numerator is the time that processing is done by a particular PE. So let's say it's 100 clock cycles, let's say. And the simulation time can be total 10,000 clock cycles.
Does it make sense to give you in percentage?
Yeah, this is percentage only.
Oh, that's a percentage?
Yeah, that's percentage. Oh, I think I forgot that percentage. Sorry. It's in percentage only.
Then you don't need that many digits.
I think I just use Excel. And so what we wanted to see here is, compared to single flow case, in two flows, your units are utilized or they are busy quite significantly. So you can see the shoot up, like almost, it should be almost twice, let's say, since we are going for a 2 flows or something. But in some of the cases, it's quite varying in nature. It also 6 times, or it's at 8 times, something or other. So we also need to analyze what went wrong or what's going on, why you are getting these height of figures.
Okay, then can you explain the one header or the scrambler, why in two flows it more than double?
Yes, that's what this table will show, and the problem associated with it. And before that, actually, I also wanted to show the bus contention. Then you will have the total global picture of resources which are utilized, which are underutilized, and then you can do it completely. So this is another table again showing a percentage increase in utilization, like 92% or.
The reason you're putting all these numbers in tables rather than graphs?
I think these were just two, maybe.
That's right, graph would show you probably.
The trend it will show you. But
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, well, the trend may or may not
presentation,
mean much.
If you put 50 numbers onto a slide, it's a little bit hard to dig through in the time you spend on one individual slide. It would be really better if you can spend the
Have
time
a
to
graph.
create graphs out of them.
Or add graph together with this data.
Okay, that will make sense and related.
You do it in Excel, you give it.
Yes.
See,
Sorry. So the later part is of bus utilization. So how much AXR bus is getting utilized? So in single flow, percentage almost less than 30. It's like almost 23, 26, 29. And in multiple flows, it's going to 42 is the highest. So now we can see and analyze that what's going on or why we are getting this effect of package and all this thing. So out of these three things, the bus was very much underutilized.
So multiple flows means also two flows or more than two?
Multiple flows actually we just have to flow.
You should say that. Is multiple flow I go to, I don't know how many flows there.
So
There's two flows on the graph, but you should say two flows.
yes.
Say multiple.
On the second slide, it's not.
No, I think
Oh, here we-
I must have missed it. Yeah, here it says multiple. So the bus was not that much utilized. So there was no bus contention. If there was bus contention or everyone is asking for the bus, you could have seen utilization as close to 80%, 90%. So the bus is almost free. So you have enough bandwidth and the resources are free. The next part is this part. How much amount of time the processing engines are busy. So we do see that processing engines are utilized maximum amount of time. So then what is going on? The VFP controller is not creating a bottleneck. The conclusion of this analysis is VFP controller is scheduling the task at a fairly proper rate. But the processing engines is creating a bottleneck. Because the processing engines are slow. If the processing engine has not finished its current task, it's not going to get new task from the VFP controller. So this is how we create a bottleneck. Now again, we have the modulator, which is the slowest
I'm not
processing
sure I
engine.
can quite understand these numbers here. These are some utilization of your processing engine in
Yes.
percentage.
Yes, in percentage.
So for 1%, your scrambler is used, for one flow, your
Uh-huh.
scrambler is used 12%.
Yes.
And for two flows,
Yes, I will.
it's used 86%.
Yes, I will.
Yeah, exactly. That was my question. I mean.
Yeah, I will elaborate on that now. I will try to explain.
So unless your overhead is incredibly high,
No, there are two things. First, these processing engines are way too much occupied. There are again one more, let's say, implementation penalty which we are paying. The output buffer needs to be read by the next consumer. If the output buffer is not read, the processing engine will say, I'm still executing the same task. So there is an extra wait period added to it.
so it's not really executing, it's waiting down there.
Yeah, but
It's done, but
Yeah, we could not
waiting
manage-
for the buffer to be empty so that I can go
There
out.
are-
One of the things.
That's
that he-
exactly.
Yes.
That's
He doesn't have,
Exactly.
so we have,
So if I would say your buffer is inadequate here. So you need to high throughput, you need to increase your buffer. I don't.
It's
see-
actually the slowest P is the problem. So
That-
the slowest
Yeah,
P in the
yeah.
chain is slow.
That's only the
So
bottleneck.
that creates the back pressure actually on previous modules. Since this guy still is busy doing its own processing, the previous guy cannot transfer his data to the next guy.
You also have an output buffer, right?
Yes.
And so when your processing engine remains busy, that means your output buffer is full. You can't put the packet in.
That's right.
In the output buffer.
So waiting for buffer.
he has two buffers anyway, but ultimately, the full performance, the total performance will be dictated only on the other with the slower speed. There's nothing for these guys to.
I guess initially my understanding was that your VFP would schedule all the units so that none of the buffers ever fill up. Is that not the case?
Actually,
There is, I mean, you can add additional buffers so they will not fill up. But ultimately, you cannot do faster than what you can do with the slowest guy in the chain. The idea is to then utilize the faster guys in the chain for the multiple flows.
So I was trying,
no,
I guess
actually,
this goes back to the question I answered in the part one of the analysis.
model.
Why do we need the VFP?
You need VFP actually to balance the load.
At
Anyway.
that time, we reached the conclusion that there are two alternative designs. You get rid of the scheduler completely, and you just let every
Thanks.
processing engine independently wait for a new packet to come in, process it, put it into the output.
So basically
In
you,
that case, sometimes
You can do that
the
on-
buffers might
conceptually,
your
yeah.
buffers might overflow, or you have to hold off when you're busy if your buffers are full. So I thought the reason for putting in the VFP was to prevent that and schedule each processing unit.
You cannot get rid of the scheduler. If you want to satisfy the performance requirements, you have to cut the scheduler. Are you going to distribute it across the engines, or you do it in the software or the hardware? It's a different story. Your best chances of doing it right, means to satisfy the application constraints, is if you have the global scheduler, because you have the global visibility, and you do it as fast as you can in the hardware. But you have to have it, otherwise you.
So
question is, I think his question is, can the scheduler help in removing this bottleneck? Or have you exploited enough for the scheduler is doing the best job and still we end up with this?
So the scheduler cannot remove the bottleneck. The only thing you can do is either
Increase
expedite.
buffer space, increase buffer space.
Either that will not help. The bottleneck is bottleneck. You can speed up the extension or throw in more engines. The engine
Because,
extension, right?
no, because the scheduler is scheduling the task properly.
The
But
scheduler slow down some of the previous units so that the buffer never
The
breaks.
scheduler will not slow them down. There's nothing for them to do if this guy is busy.
Maybe I'm not getting what the scheduler actually does. So I saw
So it
the
allocates
scheduler
the-
tells a processing engine when to start processing a packet, when to wake
thought
up
that's what
and
it is.
when to
So
process.
scheduler will
So if you have a pipeline with buffers associated at every point, you could, and you have a scheduler that knows when processing starts and when processing is finished of each buffer, of each packet, then the scheduler should be able to monitor buffer sizes.
But currently, the
Well,
scheduler doesn't know about the buffers. Why is it? The
This is
scheduler is
dynamic
unaware of
scheduling.
it.
I mean, you can make scheduling very complex. If you want to monitor the buffer sizes, it only makes sense if you want to do the dynamic load balancing. And
You know,
that's very, very complex.
Current
That's
state
very
is
beyond-
Completely static scheduling.
This is the static
There's no
scheduling, you just-
information flowing back from the processing engine.
You provision the flows, and then the scheduler just at the runtime does what you have told him upfront to do in order to satisfy the performance.
I think the even scheduler, and this is the best it can do given the resources it has.
Yeah.
That, so even modifying the schedule is not going to change you anything, because the resources are fixed.
How much variance in processing time is there?
How much variance? For this particular example, it goes.
Each of these units. Say you
Uh,
have between different
At least
packets.
I can see some 300 to 400 clock cycles difference between a single fundamental.
The slowest one takes 700 clock cycles,
Fine,
the
come on.
fastest one takes 50 clock cycles, or 100.
The fastest processing unit. in
Yes,
one
it's
So if I look
7
at, if
times
I look
shorter.
at one processing engine, say that only the scrambler, and I get these chunks of package coming in, how much does the processing time vary from chunk to chunk?
It will be the same because chunk sizes are fixed.
To be exactly the same, and
Yes.
for all the others, that's also the case?
Yeah. But
So
No, no,
then,
you
then
know,
I
it's
should
not
be able to
synthetic.
create a static schedule.
Yeah, yeah.
You know all the processing times, then you should be able to
Yes,
calculate
but
the
then
buffer
the
sizes that
processor
are needed
waits.
so that it never fills up.
yes, see, but then processor waits till someone is reading its output.
Basically, scheduler nothing but a state machine, and it's like defining
That's
the
what it
sequence,
is.
defining the sequence basically, what option, or what operations.
It's not
will
actually,
happen.
it's not actually true. Depending on the rate, the scrambler, the chunk size changes on the header.
Yeah, for a particular flow, it will have the same time duration. The scrambler will take the same time for particular step. But now suppose you implement Wi-Fi, it will take different time. If you implement something else, it will take different time. So it's the same for one particular flow, but across different
Okay, or
protocols,
if you
it
were to
is different.
support multiple formats.
You
at the
make
same
every
time,
Okay,
decision.
so now you are talking, yes. So if you have multiple flow of different kind of,
Yeah,
because
so-
their scheduler plays a very important role in defining which flow should be mixed with the other flow.
So it's not that you can decide upfront at design time that, okay, if you told only Wi-Fi going to be implemented, then you could have decided the sizes exactly. The faster ones would have bigger buffer sizes, the slower one would
The
have.
intent is for
But that cannot be done right now.
platform.
So there are two things that help
Just supporting one
with
platform.
allocating the resources.
You want to cater to different protocols and
Provisioning time.
other functionality.
And provisioning time is whenever you allow the flow in the system. The other thing is to carry on the scheduling decisions, and this is what you have to do at the runtime. So basically you polish the system.
Can you give me an example of what a scheduling decision would be?
So basically if you have the statistics-based scheduling, then you will give the higher priority to some flows. So if you know that this flow is higher priority than the other one, you don't have any, for the sake of the argument, you don't have any hard real-time constraints. But you say you have 4 flows, one is a higher priority, the one is a lower priority. Based on the service levels agreement, you just allocate the flows. You will allocate the priorities to different flows. But at runtime, you have to arbitrate it.
Yeah, I understand. You know, typically we have seen also when we implemented, like in LTE, we have this FFPI active block, that's the bottleneck. And so the resources, hardware resources goes for that, try to put highest in there. Even then, that is the bottleneck.
Here we have a
That's what I'm
modulator.
saying,
Yeah.
right?
Here, difference
Here,
between modulator and FFT
The
is slightly
problem,
less.
the problem is when they did this, right, this was across many students, right?
Yeah.
The modulator, the FFT was taken from Xilinx and it was highly efficient.
Optimized.
And then modulator was designed by a student highly
Oh,
inefficient.
Shivali.
So the modulator is the slowest one.
Yeah, okay.
And the FFT is faster than the
Oh, that's why we
modulator.
have less.
Yeah, it's not pipeline nothing
That's
because
it.
the FFT is pipeline.
That's
There is-
exactly the
there is no
point I was
pipeline
making.
nothing. It's just reading one.
Okay, anyway, the idea here is you have to look into all these issues.
The important thing is that the runtime control, which is this PHP control, is not the bottleneck. As long as you can have, as long as the
Yeah, yeah,
units are
maximum
utilized,
utilization.
it means that you can keep them engaged.
The bottleneck, what is this thesis about? This thesis about is providing a framework where we can
Sure,
even
sure.
discuss things, right?
Yeah, absolutely, I absolutely accept it. I mean, the discussion came up. And
We couldn't even discuss
We
these
discussed this, I
things.
agree. Anyway, I mean, take it in a positive manner.
No, definitely.
What
It's not a good-
what you see.
That's very useful, thank you.
Yeah.
So, and so these were the actually reasons that the P's are slow and it's creating a kind of a back pressure. So the ultimately what the truth came out to be the scheduling scheme is effective. It's only the matter of how fast P's can do. Maybe you can replicate or do something else.
Yeah.
Have better P's. This was again another parameter we could compute using OVM-based environment. Every synchronous task is associated with a particular guard time interval. So by defining a synchronous task, you will say start the task at let's say time t100, and then you have a time frame from 100 to 200 to schedule this task. So this is we are defining that in this slot I want this task to be activated. So how do you know, or how does the system programmer know what should be the guard time? So in order to check that, we had some results about the synchronous task activation from our previous analysis. And we tried to find out, let's say we have 7 functional units in the current system right now.
What is the flow, right?
The number of FUs is number of synchronous tasks which are active.
Function.
Yeah, function.
But,
Sorry. Number of synchronous tasks active in the system at that instant. So let's say if you have 7 synchronous tasks across 7 different FUs, then this has to meet the entire frame. So the delay or the guard time should be number of FUs into the average sync time. And we proved it experimentally. We found out that what should be the optimum value of it. So finally, we saw that the OVM-based prevision was very powerful in categorizing validation requirements or in terms of even functional verification requirements. Because we could generate constraint random stimulus, we have the hookups for coverage, we have the hookups for automatic checking, we have the hookups for logging things. So you know exactly what is going on in the system with the timestamp, with the task ID. So you can monitor exactly what is going on. You can pinpoint, you can analyze that results later. Like we analyze for DTI and PA, like what went wrong and who went wrong. So this was there. And the next confusion was DHP controller is not creating that system bottleneck as such, except the P's which are being slow. We also saw the utilization of processing engines and system interconnects, but the utilization of bus was fairly low. So it was also not creating much of an bottleneck as such. The next part is we also computed the guard time, because this is essentially necessary for a system programmer who really needs to know what should be my guard time. He can reduce it, he can increase it. He doesn't have any idea. So this computation will help him in deciding the parameter for it. The later is the future work. What should be done more exhaustively, or we need to really have more elaborative test cases for functional verification in order to get, let's say, 100% coverage. We also need to have more flows. Right now we just have 2 flows, and even with 2 flows you see a lot of high utilization. So I would wonder what will happen if you go for 3rd flow or 4th flow. The task activation and again API may shoot up, because again P's are slow and they are still processing.
how did you collect those data? Did you implement it in the hardware and looked at it, or
No,
just
we have
simulation?
like monitors written into it, which is a part of OVM-based verification.
Okay.
So we extract the information.
So it is very easily extensible, right?
Yes, yes.
We add more,
I just
we use the same
I
monitor.
create a 1 monitor per FU, and I just create 7 objects of it.
Good.
And the purpose you have it.
When you use 2 flows, are these 2 flows of the same protocol or 2 flows of
Yes.
different
Yeah.
protocol?
Right now they are of same protocol and
Same
even they are of same data rate.
That's,
Can you go back to your utilization number? So all the packet size, data rate, everything the same?
Yes. Only
Are they the same rate?
No, this is 24 Mbps for both.
Two flows,
Two flows.
both the flows.
Yes, two floor both are the same.
If you get two, if you use two flows, then all your utilization should approximately double.
Roughly double, yes. So we, for modulator you can see, right? it's almost-
So on the
for the 93% you can see in for 12 Mbps.
why would they? Let's see. So 8, you shouldn't get any bottleneck there. 40%, two flows would be 80, you shouldn't get any bottleneck.
So this slow module is
I guess
putting
the
the
8 to 51 question, did we answer that? How do we get?
Yeah, that was my question. I don't get it.
actually it's like a, you can imagine as a domino effect as well. The problem of the buffer reading and P is active.
So the header is the first guide, right?
Yes.
He's not
So it's
measuring.
waiting for the data probably most of the time.
Header is waiting so that someone can read
He,
it.
he needs another 1 month to fix this, but since he has a deadline to get a job, then we won't force him to do that. Right now, he's measuring the waiting time also.
Okay.
Yeah,
That has to be
Remember
separated
that's
actually.
true.
Yeah, so ideally the times that you should look at here are for the modulator, because
Oh,
modulator is the
oh,
slowest.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be waiting. So his utilization is actually the real utilization that you can look at, because modulator is the slowest.
Moderator is the first.
Yeah,
Yes.
and his utilization is the somewhat the real utilization that you can think of, because he's not waiting for, mostly doesn't wait for anyone, but there are again special scenarios there where he also waits for 1 or 2 tasks.
But the matter of argument, what you call utilization, we
Yeah,
call.
yeah.
wait
Yes,
time
also,
is equal to-
yes, in terms of the real
So when we
utilization.
say waiting time, you mean waiting for a new chunk to come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, new chunk to come in and someone reading its output buffer. Like
Or
if
it,
the,
it,
if
it
the
can deliver the data because the buffer is
Yeah.
busy on the day.
so the processing engine still says I'm busy, even though it has finished processing, it still says I'm busy. So the scheduler is unaware of this buffers issue.
The bottom line is,
So that on the buffer side, it full triggers back and then.
Yeah, and then you see the, it's like a domino effect.
See, typically what happens is, not, your case is too many heterogeneous stuff. Typically what happens is, we like to see the traffic pattern. Based on that, we see what kind of buffer is not optimal, but will give you kind of a reasonable return on your investment, if you put it that way. Right? So that's what typically people do. So some future study you can do, like this kind of traffic pattern, what we expect. Lot of Wi-Fi, little bit of LTE and maybe CDMA and 30%, and others with the 40%. And let's see what kind of buffer we can we afford that? That's what it is.
Yeah, that's right.
So in that case, that the wait time would be a lot less.
Provided the P's are working.
Yeah.
fast.
this is actually very complex. There should be analysis with the wait times and without wait
Without
times.
wait.
So then you can really
Yeah,
see the
if
effect of the
you
buffer.
can find that out, that would be good.
No, but
That's
still,
why people
let's say
want-
considering to the single flow case, you know that this is the average processing time,
Yeah,
which you
yeah.
have the figures. And from that point to the multiple case, multiple flow case, you really know that 400 clock cycles are extra. So that has to be because of the back pressure or something. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's not working. So even though we don't have definitive figures, we can reduce it.
Okay.
Very good.
Why is your utilization for 12 megabits generally higher than your utilization for 20 megabits?
Probably more data was there and during wait time it is still working.
The 34 megabits per second was running 200 megabits long, right? This is
So
the-
also-
Okay.
100.
The time that the modulator is the slowest speed, the time that the modulator takes to work is somewhat constant across rates. Okay, even for 12 Mbps, 24 Mbps, it is almost the same. But all the blocks before the modulator, the processing time varies a lot with the flows. Okay, so that creates this kind of changing numbers, because
So this, for 24 megabit, the processing times will be longer.
longer, yes. For all the guys who are behind the modulator.
They have more bits to process.
Yeah, they have more bits to
For the
process.
same chunk size.
Whereas for the modulator, it is almost the same.
So the
Well, why is it
processing
almost the
time is
same?
longer.
Because
the utilization drop.
he gets more bits and he represents them in lesser number of bits,
Oh,
or he gets less bits and he represents them in more number
More
of bits.
The chunk size is.
He's never waiting, I guess.
Yeah, he's never waiting, and that's why I said
That's why you
that
see
the
that.
numbers for the modulator are the two
Because
numbers.
he's the slowest guy. He's always working.
Yes.
Sometimes the advantage. The utilization number is hard.
So you get
You're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slowest worker in your work.
He's always
Very busy.
He's always He's always busy.
Yeah, right? But lowest productivity, though. Lowest productivity, and if you talk to him, he's busy like hell. I mean,
So we have these people coming at 6 o'clock in the morning.
yeah, all day working.
In the evening.
So it's roughly, I will say just the sum of its domino effect of the land pressure thing. So should I go ahead? Okay. So then in the future we also wanted to run more flows, and we really wanted to have some sort of features added so that we can differentiate between waiting time and actual real processing time. Because processor as soon as it's finished computing, it will start putting data into the output buffer. So we need to really segregate it. It's a bit complicated. It's not that trivial. And plus, we need to also see that what will happen if we replicate certain Ps, like, or in a simple solution might be increase the profit of the Ps, or better P codes, and see the effect. Because we have the infrastructure in place, we just have to run the simulation and figures will come out, and that will give us. Then at times it may happen that VFP overhead is way too much more than the processing engine's processing time or something. This is the return analysis. And we also need to have some sort of schemes so that we can share the data between one producer and a consumer. Because right now the data is going across the bus, so you can have a different like research area where you can define how we should do this in order to optimize the data, optimize the overhead. Like one drastic idea could be that you just have FPGA like internet like structure and just choose the proper interconnects at time and have the multi-port memory guide. But then you pay a lot of cost in terms of interconnect and extra hardware resources. So this is again one solution, but there can be many more other artificial changes associated with it. So that if we improve, then you may not have to go through VFP and all those things. Right? You can avoid the bottleneck. If we can just give, okay, just do the task, go. I don't have to. He doesn't have to be involved in the data transfer part. So that can be another area which we need to look into. And, that's it.